In the rugged, often unforgiving terrain of southwestern Vermont lies a small pocket of wilderness that has defied explanation for decades. We speak of the Bennington Triangle, an area centered around the now largely abandoned town of Glastenbury.
The term itself was coined by author Joseph A. Citro, grouping together several inexplicable missing persons cases that occurred in a concentrated 5-year span, specifically between 1945 and 1950. It's a pattern that demands scrutiny.
Exactly. 5 people vanished between those dates, seemingly swallowed by the very mountains that define this region. Before we delve into the timeline, we must understand the setting. Glastenbury was once a thriving logging center, but by 1937, it was unincorporated, essentially abandoned.
That isolation is key. The terrain is harsh, dense forest, rugged inclines, and historically unpredictable weather. From a purely logistical standpoint, the area presents massive challenges for search and rescue, even today.
Indeed, but the nature of these disappearances pushes beyond simple misadventure. We begin our timeline on November 12, 1945. The first shadow falls over a man named Middie Rivers.
Rivers was a 74-year-old local hunting guide, not a lost tourist, but a man deeply acquainted with the Bickford Hollow Woods near Woodford. He was leading a hunting party of 4 men.
On the afternoon of November 9th, Rivers was seen walking ahead of his party, heading in the opposite direction of their camp. By nightfall, he hadn't returned. A search was immediately launched.
A search that yielded almost nothing. For a man with his experience, disappearing so completely is statistically anomalous. The only trace recovered, as some reports suggest, was a single rifle cartridge left behind.
He was never seen again, leaving the area unsettled. Then, just over a year later, the second and perhaps most famous case solidifies the area's ominous reputation.
Paula Jean Weldon, an 18-year-old sophomore at Bennington College. She left campus in the early afternoon on December 1st, 1946, stating she was going for a hike toward the long...
Welcome back to the Bennington Triangle, where the woods keep secrets. Last time, we established the geographical oddity, the sprawling, dense wilderness anchoring the southwest corner of Vermont. Today, we turn our attention to the timeline. Because the triangle isn't a sudden phenomenon. It's a collection of disappearances spanning decades, though several key incidents anchor the narrative.
Indeed, Elias. When we look at the historical record, it's easy to paint the whole region with one brushstroke of the inexplicable. But separating the genuine anomalies from simple accidents, a hiker falling into a ravine, exposure, is crucial for forensic history.
And the first widely documented case that seems to defy simple explanation centers around a young man in 1945. The name is Paula Weldon.
Paula Weldon, a Bennington College student. She was 19, hiking alone near the base of Mount Equinox. The details are almost painfully ordinary. She told friends she was going for a short walk, perhaps exploring an old logging road. She was wearing a bright red jacket.
A bright red jacket? You'd think that would make a search infinitely easier. She left her dorm on December 1st, 1946, a cold, late autumn day, and she was never seen again. No trace of the jacket, no sign of struggle.
That's the element that troubles skeptics. People get lost, Elias, but a healthy 19-year-old doesn't vanish off a well-known path in broad daylight without leaving something. No discarded clothing, no footprints leading nowhere. The search parties were extensive. The woods were combed.
And we must emphasize, this wasn't deep wilderness initially. She was close to civilization, yet nothing.
It establishes the pattern. The terrain itself seems to swallow evidence. It's almost as if the vanishing point wasn't a consequence of movement through the woods, but movement out of reality.
Let's fast forward slightly to the next case that cemented the growing unease in the community. James Tedford.
Tedford, 1948. He was a 19-year-old man too, heading home from a visit to a relative near the area.
Welcome back to the chilling heart of the Bennington Triangle. We've mapped the territory, now we must map the chronology. Last time, we established that these are not isolated incidents. But to truly understand the gravity of this place, we must focus on the case that arguably put Glastenbury on the map of the unexplained, the vanishing of Paula Weldon.
Elias, put it on the map is perhaps an understatement. The Paula Weldon case in December 1946 is the template. It's the first major incident where local authorities, the media, and the public realized something deeply irregular was happening in those woods.
Exactly. Paula Weldon, just 18 years old, a student at Bennington College. On December 1st, she told friends she was taking a walk, a short walk, near the edge of the campus woods.
She was wearing a red jacket and dark slacks, easily visible, even in the late afternoon gloom. She stepped off the path, heading toward the thicket surrounding Long Trail, and that was the last confirmed sighting.
The search began immediately. Thousands of man-hours. The terrain was brutal, yes, but the area was not some inaccessible wilderness. It was minutes from a college campus. What was the initial finding, Doctor?
The initial sweep turned up nothing conclusive for days. Then, a breakthrough that only deepened the mystery. About a mile from where she was last seen, searchers found her red jacket, neatly folded, on a stump.
Neatly folded? That detail has always stuck with me. A girl who likely panicked or became disoriented doesn't stop to carefully arrange her outerwear before continuing into the cold.
It speaks to deliberation. Either Paula took her jacket off herself, perhaps to avoid snagging it while climbing over something, though no one believed that, or someone else placed it there. The area where the jacket was found was dense underbrush, almost impenetrable.
And yet, no struggle. No footprints leading away from the stump that indicated distress. No blood, no sign of foul play in the traditional sense. Just a jacket, waiting for someone to find it.
The investigation tried everything. The local police, state troopers.
Welcome back to the Bennington Triangle. We've analyzed the foundational case, Paula Weldon, the young student swallowed whole by the woods in 1946. But the woods rarely remain empty for long when they are hungry. Today, we move forward 7 years to another disappearance that carries the same chilling hallmark, meticulous planning undone by an unexplained vanishing act.
Elias, the Weldon case was defined by her youth and inexperience hiking. The next major incident introduces a different profile, a man who knew the terrain yet disappeared just as completely. That contrast is vital for anyone trying to find a pattern here.
Precisely. We are now in the winter of 1953. The man in question, James E. Fulmer, a 52-year-old mechanic from Bennington, Vermont. Fulmer was not a casual hiker. He was deeply familiar with the area surrounding Mount Tabor and the deep woods near the base of Stratton Mountain. On December 1st, 1953, he informed his wife he was going hunting, a common enough activity in that area, even heading into early winter.
And this is where the investigation needs to pause. He had his rifle, warm clothing, and significant knowledge of the local geography. He wasn't lost in the traditional sense. He was on a deliberate expedition.
He left his truck parked near a logging road outside the national forest boundary. He was last seen heading east into an increasingly dense area. He intended to return by nightfall. He never did.
What makes the Fulmer case so frustrating for investigators is the lack of misstep. There was no sudden storm, no reported illness. He walked into the woods and the world stopped recording him.
Search parties mobilized quickly. They scoured the known hunting trails. They found nothing. No dropped equipment, no spent shell casings, no signs of struggle. Anya, if a trained outdoorsman like Fulmer encounters trouble, a fall, an animal attack, there is usually evidence. A broken branch, a misplaced piece of gear. Why the complete vacuum of evidence?
It suggests two main possibilities, Elias. Either the terrain itself swallowed the evidence, which, given the density and...
Welcome back to the Bennington Triangle, where the woods keep secrets. We've charted the descent of Paula Weldon into the unknown and grappled with the sheer baffling certainty of Alan Fulmer's vanishing in 1953. The years roll on, and the pattern, or lack thereof, begins to solidify.
Exactly, Elias. While the timeline between Weldon and Fulmer offered a 7-year gap, the next significant event in the Triangle's grim ledger only takes us forward a few short years, 1957. And this case introduces a fascinating new element, the unreliable or perhaps the unwilling witness.
We turn our attention now to the case of Paul Hilton Mondello, a traveling salesman, a man accustomed to navigating unfamiliar routes. How does a man whose job is literally to arrive simply cease to exist?
Mondello was visiting the area, reportedly on business, driving a blue and white Ford sedan. He stopped at a local service station near the edge of the wooded area we now identify as the Triangle. The last confirmed sighting of him alive places him heading toward a known but isolated logging road.
And what were the circumstances of his departure from the station? Did he seem troubled? Was he expecting company?
The attendant reported nothing unusual. Mondello paid for his gas, asked for directions to a specific business further south, and drove off. A completely unremarkable transaction. The car was found 3 days later, not miles away, but almost directly where the attendant pointed him.
3 days. His vehicle abandoned. We have to assume that if he walked away, he did so without provisions, without communicating. What did the search teams find inside the Ford?
The initial reports are crucial here, Elias. The car was locked. His luggage was still in the trunk. His wallet, containing cash, was on the passenger seat. And crucially, a cigarette case, a distinctive silver one, was left open on the dashboard.
If a traveler is planning a brief stop, they usually take their identification and money. If they are fleeing, they take everything. Abandoning cash and identification suggests an abruptness that borders on the instantaneous. Welcome back to the Bennington Triangle, where the woods keep secrets. We have charted the baffling disappearances of Paula Weldon, Alan Fulmer, and Michael Mondello. 3 adults, 3 different sets of circumstances, united only by the oppressive silence of the Glastenbury wilderness.
Elias, what links them so strongly is the lack of physical evidence. No struggle, no remains, just erasure. The geography seems to actively swallow the trails.
Exactly. But the timeline demands we keep moving forward, because the pattern, as frustratingly inconsistent as it seems, continues. We jump now from the early 50s into the latter half of that decade. A new decade, a different victim profile, but the same inescapable gravity.
This brings us to 1955, and a case that, frankly, chills me more than the others, simply because of the victim's age.
We are talking about James Tucker, a 9-year-old boy, vanished from the very edge of this oppressive landscape. It was October 1st, 1955. James was staying with relatives near the Bennington border, close to the Appalachian Trail access points. He was described as playful, familiar with the local environment.
Familiar, but still a child. Reports indicate he was playing near the property, possibly chasing a pet, or perhaps simply wandering off the beaten track, which, in this region, is an invitation.
He was last seen around 4:30 p.m. The initial search, as one might expect, was immediate and massive. Local police, state troopers, even volunteers from the nearby communities mobilized.
And what did the initial sweep uncover, Elias? The classic Bennington silence?
Worse, in some ways. They found his tracks initially, small footprints heading in the direction of the heavier woods. But those tracks petered out abruptly, not fading away from where, but simply ceasing, as if he had been lifted from the earth.
That's the key, isn't it? With an adult, you can argue fatigue, disorientation, perhaps an accidental fall into a ravine. With a child, the deviation from normal behavior is starker. If he got lost, he would likely...
Welcome back to the Bennington Triangle, where the woods keep secrets. We have mapped the core tragedies: Weldon, Fulmer, Mondello, and the innocent shadow of James Tucker in 1955. 4 definitive losses spanning a decade, each defying logical explanation.
And Elias, it's crucial to note the shift in public reaction following Tucker's disappearance. The national media spotlight had intensified significantly after the first few cases. The intensity of the subsequent search efforts reflects that growing national unease about this specific patch of Vermont.
Indeed. But what happens when the intense glare of the media fades? What happens when the initial frantic searches yield nothing but dead ends? We enter what I call the quiet period. The late 1950s and early 1960s saw fewer headline-grabbing incidents within the precise boundaries we've established. But this silence is deceptive, Dr. Sharma. Was it truly quieter, or were the searches simply less publicized?
A critical distinction, Elias. I've reviewed local police blotters and supplementary missing persons reports from Bennington County covering that interim period. There are reports of hikers getting lost and recovered, accidents, even suicides, all standard occurrences in rugged terrain, but nothing bears the absolute clean erasure of the 4 primary cases.
The authorities, facing intense scrutiny, became perhaps more rigorous in their initial assessments. A hiker lost for 48 hours was found. They didn't escalate it to a triangle event. The threshold for true mystery became higher.
So the absence of a major disappearance doesn't equate to safety. It feels more like the woods are simply pausing, taking a breath before the next engagement.
And then the narrative shifts slightly again, not with a new adult vanishing, but with the enduring, painful echoes of the past. We must address the aftermath, Anya, the impact on the families, and the obsessive nature of the unofficial searches that never truly ended, particularly for Paula Weldon.
The Weldon family specifically never stopped looking. That's the human cost we often gloss over when discussing cryptids or
Welcome back to the Bennington Triangle, where the woods keep secrets. We've tracked the ghosts of the 1940s and 50s, Paula Weldon, Alan Fulmer, Michael Mandello, in the brief tragedy of James Tucker, a decade of silence, punctuated by sudden, inexplicable loss.
Elias, it's important to note that the initial wave of interest faded after Tucker. The local authorities, facing scrutiny, probably increased patrols in Glastenbury. But the woods, it seems, just waited.
Waited, indeed, because the final, definitive disappearance that truly anchors the historical narrative of the Bennington Triangle, the one that seemed to scream one last challenge to the skeptics, arrived in 1969, 10 years after Tucker. We arrive at the case of Richie Powers.
Richie Powers, a young man, 18 years old, visiting relatives in the area from New York. Unlike Weldon, who was hiking, or Fulmer, who seemed to simply walk off his path, Powers' disappearance had a specific anchor point, a specific vehicle.
That's right. October 31st, 1969, Halloween. Powers and his cousin, Freddie Whitman, were driving near Woodford, heading toward the woods near a ski slope. They stopped near a creek.
The story goes that Powers told Whitman he needed to relieve himself. He walked into the dense brush alongside the road. Whitman waited. 5 minutes turned into 10, then 20. By the time Whitman went in after him, Powers was gone.
Whitman was the last person to see him. He searched for hours, calling out. By the time police were involved, the terrain was unforgiving, and the timing, Halloween night, added a layer of macabre folklore to the official report.
And this is where the geographical pattern seems to reassert itself. Powers vanished near a body of water, much like Paula Weldon's search involved significant creek crossings. And critically, the initial search yielded absolutely nothing. No footprint, no dropped item, no trace of struggle.
The irony here is that by 1969, the area was marginally more developed than in the 40s. People knew the reputation of Glastenbury, yet Powers vanished as completely as if he'd stepped through